What kind of man does slavery create? One meant to be broken, or one destined to rise? Born enslaved in 1818, Frederick Douglass was denied education, family, and freedom. Yet he became a statesman, a revolutionary thinker, and a man powerful enough to confront America with its greatest hypocrisy. Imagine a world where the color of your skin dictates your destiny. This was the world Frederick Douglass was born into in 1818 in Talbot County, Maryland. But this wasn't the world he would die in. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, his early life was a blur of hardship and separation. He never knew his father, a white man, and was separated from his mother, Harriet Bailey, when he was just an infant. This was a common and cruel practice of slavery, designed to break family bonds and crush the soul. He was raised by his grandmother until he was sent to the Wye House plantation at a young age. Life on the plantation was a constant lesson in cruelty. He witnessed unspeakable violence, the kind that was meant to instill fear and obedience. But within young Frederick, something else was taking root, a burning desire for knowledge. A pivotal moment came when he was sent to Baltimore to serve Hugh Auld. Hugh's wife, Sophia Auld, had never owned a slave before, and, against her husband's wishes and the law, began teaching Frederick the alphabet. It was a small act of kindness with revolutionary consequences. Hugh Auld furiously put a stop to it, declaring that if a slave learned to read, he would become unfit to be a slave. He was right. Those words didn't scare Frederick, they ignited a fire in him. He realized that literacy was the key, the pathway from slavery to freedom. From that moment on, his education became a secret, defiant mission. He was clever. He would trick local white boys into teaching him, trading bread for lessons. He'd carefully study letters on ships in the harbor and practice writing in the dirt. With every word he learned, the walls of his mental prison began to crumble. He devoured every piece of text he could find, from the Bible to newspapers to a book called The Columbian Orator, a collection of speeches about liberty and freedom. The ideas in that book of emancipation, of human rights, were like a tidal wave. They articulated the feelings that had been simmering inside him his whole life. Knowledge was power, but it was also a heavy burden. The more he read, the more he loathed his chains. His growing intellect and defiance didn't go unnoticed. He was seen as a troublemaker. To break his spirit, he was sent to work for Edward Covey, a man notorious for his brutality, known as a slave breaker. For 6 months, Frederick endured relentless physical and psychological torment. Covey worked him to the point of collapse and whipped him almost weekly. It was a period of absolute despair. Frederick later wrote that he was broken in body, soul, and spirit. But then came the turning point. One day, after a particularly brutal beating, something inside Frederick snapped. When Covey came to whip him again, Frederick fought back. He stood his ground, a 16-year-old boy, and physically resisted the man who was meant to break him. They fought for nearly 2 hours. Frederick didn't win in a conventional sense, but he didn't lose either. More importantly, he regained his sense of self, his humanity. He wrote, "This battle with Mr. Covey was the turning point in my career as a slave. I was a man now." Covey never laid a hand on him again. The boy who was sent to be broken had instead reforged himself in the fires of resistance. After this, the idea of escape became an all-consuming goal. His first attempt failed, landing him in jail, but he didn't give up. In 1838, at the age of 20, he made his second successful attempt. Disguised as a sailor, Carrying identification papers borrowed from a free black seaman, he boarded a train in Baltimore. It was a heart-pounding, terrifying journey. Every stop, every question from a conductor could have meant capture and a fate far worse than the one he'd left behind. But he made it. He arrived in New York City, a free man. It was a moment of profound, disorienting joy. He was free, but he was also alone, in a strange city, with nothing but the clothes on his back. It was here he adopted the name Douglass to hide his identity from slave catchers. Soon after, he married Anna Murray, a free black woman from Baltimore who had encouraged his escape and helped fund it. They settled in New Bedford, Massachusetts, a thriving abolitionist community. For the first time, Douglass was living as a free man, working and providing for his family. But he couldn't stay silent. His personal freedom wasn't enough, while millions were still enslaved. In 1841, Douglass attended an anti-slavery convention in Nantucket. He was unexpectedly asked to speak about his experiences. He was nervous, hesitant. He had never spoken in front of a white audience before. But as he began to share his story, his voice grew stronger. The raw, eloquent power of his testimony held the audience spellbound. It was electric. William Lloyd Garrison, a leading abolitionist, was so impressed that he immediately hired Douglass as a speaker for the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society. This was the beginning of his public life. He traveled across the North and the Midwest, delivering powerful, fiery speeches against slavery. His presence was a walking, talking refutation of the racist ideas that underpinned the institution. Here was a man who was supposed to be intellectually inferior, yet he was more articulate, more intelligent, and more charismatic than most of his detractors. His speeches weren't just abstract arguments, they were visceral, drawing from the deep well of his own suffering. However, his success brought new dangers. Some people refused to believe he had ever been a slave, claiming he was too well-spoken. To prove his story and put a face to the horrors of slavery, he did something incredibly brave. In 1845, he published his first autobiography, The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. It was an instant bestseller, a graphic and unflinching account of his life. But it was also a massive risk. By publishing the names of his former owners and specific locations, he made himself a target for recapture under the Fugitive Slave Act. To avoid being captured, Douglass fled to Ireland and Great Britain. For 2 years, he traveled, spoke, and gathered support for the abolitionist cause. He was treated not as a fugitive, but as a man. This experience was transformative. He saw a society without the color line that defined America. During this time, his British supporters raised the money to officially purchase his freedom from his former owner, Thomas Auld. In 1847, Frederick Douglass returned to America, legally a free man. He came back with a new vision. He was no longer just a speaker for a movement. He wanted to be a leader. He moved to Rochester, New York, and started his own abolitionist newspaper, the North Star. Its motto was, "Right is of no sex, truth is of no color, God is the Father of us all, and we are all brethren." Through his newspaper, he not only fought against slavery, but also championed women's rights, becoming one of the few men to attend the Seneca Falls Convention, the first women's rights convention. He understood that the fight for freedom was universal. His philosophy evolved. He broke with William Lloyd Garrison, who believed in nonviolent moral persuasion. Douglass came to believe that if slavery was to be ended, it might require political action and even violence. He famously declared, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will." When the Civil War broke out, Douglass saw it for what it was, a war to end slavery. He tirelessly advocated for the inclusion of black soldiers in the Union Army, arguing that if black men were to fight for their own freedom, it would be a powerful statement of their claim to citizenship. He met with President Abraham Lincoln twice to discuss the treatment of black soldiers and the larger issue of emancipation. Imagine that scene, a man born a slave advising the President of the United States in the White House. It's a moment that encapsulates his incredible journey. After the war and the Emancipation Proclamation, Douglass's fight didn't end. He knew that legal freedom was just the first step. The struggle for true equality had just begun. He fought for the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which abolished slavery, granted citizenship, and gave black men the right to vote. He continued to speak and write against the rise of Jim Crow laws and the horrific violence of lynching in the South. He held several government positions, including U.S. Marshal for the District of Columbia and Minister to Haiti, using his platform to continue advocating for justice. Frederick Douglass lived until 1995, a lion of a man who had not only liberated himself, but had helped to liberate a nation from its greatest sin. His life is a powerful story of self-creation. He literally wrote himself into existence